skilled criminal defense attorney, can I do some judge shopping? I just can hold out just a little longer and get a new judge?
That is definitely a practice.
If you do family law, God bless you. You're going straight to heaven.
You can't be good at what you do unless you take time to take care of yourself.
Hey, this is Chaz Roberts. I'm a personal injury lawyer. It's my passion to bring the law to the people, and that's the purpose of this podcast. You're listening to Law Have Mercy.
Do you want to spice up?
You are listening to Law Have Mercy. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Law Have Mercy. Today I have a very special guest, Your Honor, Suzanne de Mahy. She is a judge in the 16th JDC in Louisiana. Welcome to the podcast, Judge.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
It's Friday, good.
Yeah, what do you typically do on Fridays?
I prefer not to have court on Fridays. We like to use Fridays for office days or just if you've been busy throughout the week, kind of like a downtime day, take care of some stuff at home if I need to.
Yeah, well, I can speak for every lawyer around the state and say we don't like court on Fridays either.
When I became a judge, some judges say they prefer to have court on Fridays because if they have court on Fridays, everything would resolve itself because lawyers didn't want to come to court on Friday.
Very true.
But then I said, well, nobody wants to come to court. Why do we have court on Fridays?
Right.
And as a lawyer, I found it at the end of the week, it was better to use that day to, when you've been out of the office in court, to use that day to get work done, to wrap up your week and then start off the next week. So I've always preferred not to have court on Friday if I could.
Yeah, that's probably a good policy. You said you were a lawyer before. Every judge has to be a lawyer, a licensed lawyer, and I'm assuming most practice before becoming a judge.
You don't have to practice. You have to, for 8 years, you have to have been barred for 8 years, which means you have to pass the bar exam and be certified, I guess is the word you would use. You have to be in good standing, which means you have to pay your bar dues. But you don't actually have to practice law. You might have some people that have run for judge that have sat as a law clerk their whole entire time before. Obviously, they would want somebody to practice law usually before they get elected, but there's been people that haven't actually worked for a law firm or had their own practice or worked as a prosecutor for the DA's office or with the public defender's office before they actually got elected.
Interesting. And you were, I know you were a public defender because I worked with you at the public defender's office. How long did you do that?
When I graduated from law school, my first job was with the public defender's office and that was in the 16th. So Iberia, St. Martin, St. Mary. And it was doing misdemeanors. And then within like 6 months, I started doing felonies. But I also had a private practice where I did criminal defense and some family law. That was probably, I think it was maybe like 5 years. And then I moved to the Lafayette Public Defender's Office and also did Abbeville and Vermilion Parish Public Defender's Office at the same time as maintaining a private criminal practice and doing some family law.
A lot of miles on the vehicle.
Yes.
I mean, what dollar sum could we pay you to go back to family law, right? The answer to me is you don't have enough money.
So I think I got involved in family law because sometimes you would have like a criminal defendant who also had a family case.
Yeah.
Or when you say family case, not that they're getting divorced, but they have a custody situation.
Right.
And that custody situation has a lot to do maybe with their criminal charges. So I started delving into family law, but I quickly realized that's something that's,
to put it
you
nicely,
have to have a lot of mentality to do family law.
I tell people all the time, I say, look, if you do family law, God bless you. You're going straight to heaven. There's no gaze. You're going just straight to heaven because you have the patience of a saint.
Not only do you need to know the law, family law, but I think people that do really well in family law also almost act as like therapists or counselors.
100%.
Because they need that understanding of how to treat their clients and how their clients are reacting to certain things that are happening and guide them in the right direction.
Well, and your job as the judge in the 16th, not every district is different, but you actually handle all types of cases, criminal, civil. Family law falls within civil. You handle family law cases as judge.
Yes. We're elected to be what's called general jurisdiction. And so automatically you have civil in all three parishes. And then in the 16th, that's where it's a little bit different than in the 15th. So in Lafayette, Abbeville, and Vermilion, the judges stay in their criminal seat the whole time. So when you get assigned, someone gets a case in one of those parishes, they go in front of the same judge. That defendant goes in front of the same judge the whole entire life of their case, unless that judge retires or gets removed from the bench, but otherwise they have the same judge the life of their case. In the 16th Judicial District for criminal, we have Iberia, St. Martin, St. Mary. Every year the judge rotates into a different section. So as a defendant, you will be assigned, let's say, section 2. The judges move. So if your case lasts longer than January to December, your case may start with one judge, but then finish with a different judge. So that's what's a little different about our area. So your civil cases get assigned to judges and it stays with that judge.
Right.
So, personal injury cases, business disputes, family law, but your criminal case is assigned to a section and the judges rotate. So we rotate to every parish every year. So just when you think you're getting kind of like a handle on your docket, it's like, okay, go over here next year. So it makes it kind of hard.
So if I'm a skilled criminal defense attorney, could I do some judge shopping? I just can hold out just a little longer and get a new judge?
That is definitely a practice that people see. So a lot of times in criminal, the only thing that a judge controls when it's in a criminal case that people might say, well, I want a judge shop, as they call it, is there is a, say a plea offer, and it's going to be probation. Somebody might say, if I'm going to be on probation, I want that judge to be the supervisor of my probation rather than the other one.
Because one's more harsh than the other.
Yes. Or so they'll take that plea, or there's certain situations in criminal cases where the prosecutor doesn't offer a number. For example, say someone wants to plead guilty. They might say 5 years hard labor. We're going to suspend that and we'll put you on probation. Sometimes they don't say that. Sometimes they say, if you plead guilty to this lesser offense, it's going to be what's called open-ended. And that's when the judge sentences the defendant. Based on, sometimes there's even a guide range. Like they'll say, they'll use the word open-ended. What that just means is the judge sentences you. We're not promising you anything. And they'll maybe cap it. They'll say, like, the most I can sentence somebody is to 20 years. So if that's the plea offer, sometimes they want to wait, or they might say, like, okay, we're going to plea in front of Judge de Mahy because we know what her sentence is going to be, rather than wait for another judge.
Well, I've always wanted to know this. How do you sentence? Like, to me, that seems like a very difficult job. Somebody's in front of me. The range is 5 to 20 or 10 to 30, whatever. How do you make that decision?
What makes it a little more difficult in state court than federal court. So a lot of people that do criminal law, they're very familiar with state court and federal court. Federal court has guidelines. There is numbers. They say for these crimes, this is the amount of time. If this person has criminal history,
they plug it into an algorithm.
Yeah, you have some discretion, but not a lot, and it makes that job for federal judges so much easier.
Right.
For state judges, what makes it more difficult is we have more discretion.
Yeah.
So before I was on the bench, when I was practicing, I can see what other judges were doing, kind of what the general sentencing ranges were. Obviously, I did criminal defense work, so sometimes I was like, oh, that's not necessarily the most fair sentence. But when you have to take in, so in the law, they give you guidelines to follow. It's still discretionary, but they tell you mitigating circumstances to consider, aggravating circumstances to consider. Sometimes you look at the attorneys for guidance, but I always appreciate when the attorneys come in, the defense attorney and the prosecutor, and they give you some information like, this is why, this is a factor you should consider, this is a factor, and give you some guidance on a sentence rather than just saying, oh, okay, this person committed aggravated battery, so you should give them the max. Or, they don't hit the factors, but sometimes when you have a group of lawyers, they will go through each factor and say, this is why you should consider this factor, or this person had this circumstance that you should consider. If it's a defendant, a lot of times they'll talk about, what they've done since then or their remorse.
Mitigating factors.
Yeah, mitigating factors.
So, but I mean, is that an incredibly difficult thing to do?
It's the second hardest part of my job.
Okay.
The first hardest, the hardest part, listen to me, the second hardest is sentencing. The first is, so I also do what's called child in need of care, which is involved with the Department of Children and Family Services. That's the hardest part because you're having to remove children from homes and decide when they can go back. I mean, you have the assistance of DCFS for that, but if I didn't do that kind of work, then I would probably think sentencing defendants is the hardest, especially when you have juvenile situations.
And the family's in court and people are there and I just can't imagine. How do you get through it?
So for criminal sentencing or just for in general, every
Both of them.
stressful situation.
How do you get through it?
I think if you prepare ahead of time, so you know what's coming up that day, just like anything. So you're ready for the level of stress. You keep yourself informed about it. So you know, say if it's a sentencing, you don't just wait till you get there to hear the information. I usually try to do this for criminal sentencing. I try to have everything kind of reviewed before and have a range. And then at the sentencing hearing, when they start talking, you might have witnesses that testify. You might have the victim's family or the victim testify about the impact it's had. But if I go in and I've prepared and educated myself before I do a sentencing, then I have a range that I can work with, and it's not as stressful or drastic when you're having to think about it.
So you're
It's like
creating
making
parameters.
any decision you make, hopefully, that affects your life, other people's lives. You're going to think about it for a little while. You don't just walk into court that day and hear it and say, okay, I have to make a decision on my gut real quick. I usually try to have that range ahead of time. So when I hear things, I'm just moving, like somebody might say something and I might move it up.
Right.
Let's say if we just say years, that might move it up a year, and then another witness testifies, and then you're like, oh wait, no, that moves it down.
That's
And it's
amazing.
during the time of the hearing. If it's when I say a substantial hearing, if there's a lot of information being produced at the hearing that wasn't produced prior to the hearing, then that could move a lot during the time period. Like I've started off situations where I'm listening and I usually keep a piece of paper and I'm writing notes, and I'll kind of have a number in mind, and then somebody else will testify or they'll present me with some information and I'll change the number, and I'll just do that the whole time they're talking. So at the end, I have hopefully made that range a little smaller and I can make a more definite decision about things.
Well, that tells me like the testimony you're hearing is very important to you. I think sometimes when you've been practicing law for a long time, sometimes you think that there's going to be some kind of preconceived judgment or whatever. You're listening to the testimony that's going on, and it's actually in real time affecting the way you're going to sentence that person.
I definitely think most times, and all judges, I would not say I don't speak for all judges.
No, I'm going to ask you about that in a second.
All judges are different, but I think that you have some things, whether it's criminal or civil, if you're preparing ahead of time, you have a thought already about where you're going to stand on a situation. But there might be information presented during a hearing that's going to move you some way. Because if you make a decision ahead of time and you walk in there and that's your decision, then you're not being open-minded to what else might come up during that hearing, is how I look at it.
And that's the same in civil, where you've read the briefs, you have a good idea of the arguments that are being put in. You might be doing your own research on this based on the statutes that the lawyers are citing. So you have a good feel for how this is going to act.
And you've done both practices, like in civil, the how people are when they come to court, you have briefed or written. Lawyers have submitted so much ahead of time that you know all of the factors, you know everything that's going to happen. They've even attached their exhibits. So you already know. So there's not that much movement in civil when you're in a hearing in court. But in criminal, as you know, the judge and the jury and all that, they don't get everything.
No.
Sometimes we have a few motions before us, so we're familiar with the case, but you don't hear anything until you're actually in court. So that's why there's I guess you would say in the, like you're talking about in the sentencing, there's that movement because you don't always know what that person's going to come and say on that day. I mean, you have some idea because the lawyers have told you a little bit and things like that, but you don't.
But the lawyers don't know either.
Yeah.
I mean, because that person could go rogue or say some things. And that's what's kind of cool about criminal. That's what I enjoyed about the criminal practice. It's like the Wild West, and there's constitutional protection. So somebody could scribble on a piece of paper, motion to quash, and you got to hear it, right? Because there's all these constitutional protections. And I always tell people, I was like, look, when I was at my peak at the public defender's office, you could give me a police report and I could go try the case. It's so much of it is contemporaneous and how we don't know how, we can't depose them in advance. So we don't know what they're going to say on the stand, and you have to cross-examine them.
I used to always say the civil lawyers have it so easy.
It is. I mean,
because in criminal law, there's not, you can investigate a case and, they can interview witnesses, but they don't have to cooperate.
No.
Now the prosecutor can get them to cooperate, and they have to go in, if they issue them a subpoena for grand jury. But as a criminal defense attorney, you don't have all of those privileges that civil lawyers have, where they can depose somebody and see what those witnesses are going to say, and then they can come to court and say, this is what you said in the deposition. I want to impeach you. For criminal, obviously, it's a lot different because all they might have is that one statement they gave to the police maybe like 4 years ago.
Right. Well, okay, so you have to make decisions in bench trials, which is a trial just before the judge, and you'll do that on small criminal cases, and you'll do that on civil cases under a certain dollar amount or agreed upon by the parties. But and you have to make decisions, obviously, in sentencing and child need of care. What is the judge's role in a jury trial?
So before the jury is actually even in the room, there's a lot of pleadings, motions that the lawyers are filing about what can actually happen during the jury trial. So you're making a lot of decisions about evidence ahead of time to make sure that the jury doesn't hear things that they're legally not allowed to hear. During a trial, what I always try to tell some people is when I have a jury, I have to protect my jury, because we have to make sure whether it's in criminal or civil. In criminal, you're a lot more, you're a little more active in making sure the jury doesn't hear certain things. In civil, during a trial, there's a lot less likelihood that something's going to come into evidence or a lawyer is going to say something, because they pre-try so much and they file a lot of pleadings ahead of time. So everybody knows where the ball is usually for civil. There's just these small issues that might come up, or a witness might start saying something that's not really admissible. So for civil, sometimes I say for civil trials, sometimes it can be a little boring, because
it is boring.
The things are so well planned out,
right,
that the judge is literally just sitting there watching to make sure everybody's still doing what they're supposed to do. Making sure that no one's communicating anything to the jury that they're not supposed to, no evidence is coming in. In a criminal trial, it's more likely that something might come in, because usually in a criminal trial, the witnesses aren't professional witnesses. Usually in civil, it's, you're going to have your doctors, your experts and things. So they tend to already know how to testify. In criminal trial, even if they've prepped witnesses, they don't know what they're, they're going to say.
It's wild.
And there's things. Now, I can make sure the lawyers don't ask certain questions, but it's really, you have to be on your feet. As a judge, you really have to be listening to everything, because there's so many ways something can kind of accidentally come in, and then later they can say, well, that's a mistrial, or that conviction should be overturned because this thing came in that shouldn't have. So
a mistrial is a very bad thing,
because you have to retry the
because
case.
You have to retry. So you're using all those resources. You have court reporters, you have clerks, you have bailiffs, you have a judge, you have prosecutors, you have lawyers. It's such a trial it uses a lot of resources. The real estate of the courtroom, I mean, just everything involved, the metal detectors, the 100 parking spaces for the potential jurors is just such an undertaking. And to have a mistrial, especially a trial that lasted 3, 4, 5 weeks, to do it, you just don't want to do it.
And then what you're doing is you're having to get a whole nother jury. So you're having to take, let's say you have a mistrial. Well, you already have 14 people that you sat with for a whole week. Now we have to subpoena a whole nother jury, get a whole nother group of people
off of work,
take them away from their lives, and do this all over again. Yeah. So that's why with criminal, it's like everyone has to try very, very hard. Obviously, the attorneys, okay, so, they're trying to advocate for their position the strongest they can. They want to make sure that they are doing every single thing within the law that they can to, whether it's you represent the state and you're advocating for, the victim in the state, or you represent the defendant and you're advocating for your client. Lawyers might not do it on purpose, but in that zealously advocating, they're trying to get everything they can in. They're trying to get every piece of evidence, every statement they have in. So as a judge, you have to make sure you're not letting something come in. Sometimes they're arguing, the lawyers, say they have an objection and the lawyers are arguing it very passionately, for their clients, and you have to referee them. It's not, we don't get to make, as the judge in a jury trial, we tell them, the jury's the fact finder. The judge is not. The judge tells you what the law is, and what law to apply. But the jury, the regular citizens from all walks of life, doctors, lawyers, teachers, homemakers, janitors, all those people who don't have legal experience, I have to tell them what the law is and say, apply that law to what you just heard, what you think is the evidence in this case.
And as a lawyer, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm a lawyer. I'm actually interested in this. That lawyer is my friend. The judge is my friend. That prosecutor is I'm engaged. This is my subject matter. This is what I do for a living. And I'm bored to death. And I'm not paying attention to every word it's saying. How do you expect a juror to sit there for 7, 8 hours a day and pay attention to everything that's coming in?
So one of the things I try to do as a judge too is I keep like a time. So when somebody starts, like when the jury comes in, because we're accustomed to being in court all the time.
Right.
People that work in court.
It's a muscle you have to exercise, right?
Yeah, you can just go for hours on end. But the jury's like, so when I started practicing and then when I got on the bench, I started to try to pay attention. And I figure like an hour and a half is when people need to get a break. So I try to keep, during jury trials, I try to keep a timesheet and like say, okay, they went on recess. All right, we've been here. The hardest part though is you also don't want to interrupt the flow of what's happening with the evidence. And there may be a witness that's on the stand. And I'll sit there and I'll think, okay, it's been an hour and 10 minutes. Like I'm looking that jury, they look, they're, but I don't want to interrupt the lawyer and the witness's flow. Cause that got him against,
that might be his strategy.
Yeah. So you have to figure out, cause you have to maintain the order and control, try to, have the jury not get disengaged, but at the same time, you can't, I prefer not to interrupt the flow of what the evidentiary part is, that what's happening and how they're doing witnesses, because that might be, I don't know, that might be the peak of where they are with the witness. And if I'm like, okay, well, we're going to take a break right now. Right. And the lawyers are doing,
and scene.
Yeah. What are you doing?
So this is something I don't know the answer to. Can you talk to jurors after a case?
Yes. So when I was a lawyer, I used to enjoy when a judge would do that. They would let you, some of them, because I look at it as the only way lawyers are going to get better is if they hear what happened after the fact.
What was the juror thinking and what made them?
Yeah. And so that I was allowed to do that as a lawyer, judges would let us go in the back. They would tell jurors, like, you don't have to stay. But some jurors, they're invested. They have given you their week. They want to tell you, like, this is what you messed up on. So I always went to the back, and if a judge let us, to find out just what their take was, or most of the time, because I did criminal defense, most of the time they find my client guilty. So I would ask them, when I presented this, did this sway you? Or, ask them if there was something else they were looking for. So I knew the next time I went as a lawyer to defend a client, if there was stuff that I could be providing. What does the jury want to know? Because they go in the back and there's stuff they might not know. And after you can tell them, obviously, they're like, oh, well, we didn't hear from that female that everybody was talking about. So after, we might be able to tell them, well, this is what she would have said, but this is why she wasn't allowed to testify. Because they want to know everything and they don't understand sometimes why they can't hear everything. As a judge, I do the same thing. I always ask the jurors. I also use that opportunity for me to ask them how we could have done better, because we're asking a juror to come in from their life.
Right.
They didn't want to sign up for this. And so I want to make sure I can accommodate them the best, make them feel the most comfortable, make them feel like they're not wasting their time with us. So I usually try to meet with the jury after and ask them how our process could be improved to make their experience better. I know it sounds like really hokey, but
you're hired.
We also have to run for office. So, and that's the only time we have contact with, you think about it, the jurors, that's the only time we're in court with them. And if they have a bad experience, not from the actual trial itself, but if they had a bad experience dealing with my staff, they felt like they were sitting around too long, the benches were too hard, I might not be able to do certain things about that, but at least I can find out from them if there's something we can make better.
Because you're trying to protect the integrity of their judgment and experience. Yeah. The more comfortable they are, the more they'll be engaged, the better they can listen to the evidence, the better ruling they can make.
And they might be more willing to come back for another jury.
Fat chance. No, but I'm sure some jurors actually enjoy the experience. Yeah. They feel like they're part of the process, and just like they saw on TV, except a lot less exciting and a lot longer.
Yeah.
The trial was not actually 2 hours.
There were some jurors at some time. It was a criminal case, and another lawyer was working that case, and I went to the back, and when they went to talk to the jury, and one of the ladies, because it's a criminal case, and it was a young man that was the defendant. One of the ladies said the night before, so they had heard evidence, and then the next day they came back, and that's when the case got closed. She said that night in between, she was sick to her stomach because she thought because it had the burden on her of making a decision about that young man's life.
Wow.
She took it seriously, but she was like, I was sick to my stomach thinking about that I had that responsibility. So there's a lot of people, they will take it seriously. They want it. They understand it. But at the same time, they're like, I don't know if I want to have to make that decision.
Do you experience that as a judge?
No. I think just because the experience I had before that, it preps you for it. Whereas you take somebody off the street and say, hey, here you go. You have to make this life-changing decision about somebody. I think by the time a judge is on the bench, they've had some experience with whether it's making those kinds of decisions or helping people make those kinds of decisions.
Are you ever surprised at when you talk to a jury how they came to their decision of what they actually considered?
Am I surprised?
Well,
myself?
that's a bad.
I think it's very surprising. I think that a lot of people in the legal community do not realize what a jury actually pays attention to. And so I would implore all lawyers to educate themselves, go just listen to what people think is important, because what we think is important as judges and as lawyers, a lot of time is not even what they're looking at.
Do you have any off the top of your head?
No, I don't want to necessarily.
No, I'm just curious.
Some of the stuff, I don't want to say it would surprise you, but some of the stuff that they're paying attention to, and I was lucky enough when I was coming up as a lawyer that I had people that would guide me and say, like, these are things you have to pay attention to. Like you talked about, sometimes a juror's just looking and saying, that lawyer looks nice. He's very nice. He's presenting well. And that guy over there just looks like an a-hole. I don't trust him. It's developing a trust, because you have to get these people to trust you in that 2-day window. And, they pay a lot of attention to the people and how they move around the room, and how they react to people and how they talk to the jurors,
I've heard of situations where jurors have said, I saw him writing notes and that made him look guilty, or some things that are very superficial, right? That have nothing to do with the evidence, but force a juror to move a certain way. It's shocking.
Because you have to remember, too, that they're just people.
Right.
As lawyers and judges, we're looking at the law, but
Right.
you still have a reaction to everything that happens. But because you're practiced and skilled in what you do every day, your reaction is not the overriding thing. But a general person, they're going to have a reaction, and it's going to be their personal feeling, and that is going to factor. Is going to be a very strong factor in their decision.
And that,
because everybody has that little, and that's, judges, jury has those personal biases that they don't even realize when something comes up that's an automatic, I'm going to be as general as, oh, that guy's wearing a white button-up shirt and a jacket and this guy has a tie on, and I'm automatically maybe going to have a reaction to the guy wearing a tie as being smarter, more professional, just that bias built up that you have and you don't know anything. We would call it like you're prejudging something because that natural bias that you have that you don't even realize.
and that being said, is the greatest system in the world, right? Having just normal people on a jury is the greatest system in the world that anyone has ever thought of before.
They say that's the best thing. People come to America for that. I think what makes a jury necessarily, why people think a jury is better than a judge, because you have an opportunity to convince 12 people.
Right. Your peers.
A judge is just one person.
Right.
So I don't want to say it's a lot harder, but even though that judge knows the law, there, your chances with a jury, whether it's civil or criminal, your chances with a jury might be better because that's 12 people.
Yeah. Are all state courts in other states elected judges or some appointed?
Some states appoint a judge at the beginning and they call it like a retention election. So this board or a group of people appoint someone, and then after a certain period of time, the community gets to vote to determine if that judge is, I guess, good enough or if they like them to keep their position. And then once they get past the retention, then they're fine. Some are like us, where they're elected. I would say, it's been a while since I actually did research on it on a project, but just going to different conferences and meetings with judges from all around the United States, I would say it's probably about a 50-50. There's some pros and cons to being elected versus appointed.
Well, because the people who are ultimately going to be judged by that judge had a say in who their judge is, right? And some people would say, well, it's not really an efficient system. It could be a popularity contest. That might not be the most skilled judge or whatever, right? There's kind of arguments.
The issues I think that the issue that I have with elected judges is people in the community forget, and they think a judge's position is different than any other elected official. A judge is not a representative. You are picking that person to do a job. They don't represent anyone in the community. Whereas almost all other elected officials are a representative of the community, meaning they have to vote on something, they do something, and you're picking them because they are representing your interests. What I always ask people, I'm like, what other position besides that judges are not representatives? You are supposed to pick the best person for that job that you think will be, whether it's the smartest, the most educated, the most compassionate, whatever your factors are that you're looking for in a judge. And that's what makes it hard, is because people don't understand that a judge is not a representative. The jury is a representation of the community. A judge is not. So that's what makes it harder. So I think that's sometimes why maybe they shouldn't be elected and should be appointed. But the problem with appointments is the community gets no say-so in who gets picked. So it could still be very political about, and then people aren't responsible. So if you're elected, you are responsible for your actions. You have some accountability, meaning You would hope to keep your job and get reelected. You may have some judges that don't care about that, but if you hope to keep your job and get reelected, then you have accountability for your actions because you have to get reelected.
Right.
Whereas if you were appointed, say like federal judges are appointed. They're not going to lose their job because they make a decision that the community doesn't like.
So with that being said, I'm looking at louisianajudiciary.com, and it has the kind of the makeup by party of your district or division, whatever it's called, your jurisdiction. I'm surprised by how evenly kind of split it is between Republicans, Democrats, and even independents. But as I scroll down, I see next to your name, your party is registered as a Republican. Now, talking about elections and whatnot, on one hand, I see a very lack of media coverage when it comes to elections for judge races. And so when I see that R or that D, I get an idea of kind of maybe the background of this person or their philosophy. But on the other hand, as you've talked about before we started recording, the judge is supposed to be like an official, this objective official. So is there contention within the law community about if you are running for an elected position, having a Republican or Democrat by your name?
I don't think within necessarily the legal community. I think the purpose of, I honestly wish judges could run and there wasn't a letter next to your name. Some judges, they'll change it to independent because truly you're supposed to be independent. But if you change your letter, your party, whatever it is, then sometimes people use that against you. They're like, oh, well, you used to be a Republican, now you're an independent just because you're running for judge. I personally feel like your party affiliation has nothing to do with being a judge. It could give people some guidance maybe as to what some of your perspectives are, but if you're a really good judge, you're supposed to be able to take all those perspectives and put them over here because you can't make a personal decision about things. It has to be. And that's what I tell people. I don't want to say, when people ask me sometimes, man, your job must be so hard because you have to make these decisions and you have to look at everything. I'm like, there is a law that tells me what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
I don't necessarily personally feel that way. So I have to leave at the end of the day and I follow the law. There is plenty of times where I will leave at the end of the day and I had to make a ruling on something. And personally, it might not have been what I agreed with, but that was maybe what's in the best interest of the child. There's so many parameters that guide you that you don't have to make a personal decision. You should never make a personal decision.
And you learn that from being a lawyer and specifically being a criminal defense lawyer. You still had a job to do whether you agreed with what your client did or not. Right?
And they have, without getting too much into what other judges do for their elections, they have a lot of judges or people that are running for office and they'll say like, I'm a conservative Republican and I believe in this and I'm going to do this when I'm on the bench. I discourage that because we're not supposed to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, tough on crime. I saw it in Baton Rouge. Tough on crime.
And because that's what people, and that's what they tell you when you're running for office. You have to sell people what they want to hear.
Right.
The best thing that a judge can say is, I'm not going to legislate from the bench.
Yeah.
I'm going to be patient and kind, and I'm going to listen to everything everyone has to say, and I'm going to follow the law.
Amen.
Otherwise, then but it's the politics of it. That's the bad thing about having judges elected, is to get elected, they have to give the public what the public wants to hear. And there's some things that people that aren't involved in the legal community don't know that judges can't do.
Right. Well, it's crazy. This is we just got through election season. Well, we got runoffs now, but I get flyers in the mail, and it would be somebody running for clerk of court, and they talked about pro-life and their stance on, social issues. I'm like, what does that have to do with being a clerk of court?
Yeah.
This has nothing, but you're forced to get people excited about a thing to win an election. It's crazy.
But I think, and hopefully, so when we talked about the letter next to your name, RDI, Republican, Democrat, Independent, I think it does tell people a little bit about you, but what tells people more about you is what you're actually doing. Because you can put a letter behind your name all day long, but it's what you're actually doing, what actions you're taking, because you might believe certain things and you might fall within a party line because you're general philosophy kind of agrees with some of the things they agree with, or you know, when it comes to other kinds of elections, things that affect you, whether it's the president or the governor, what party that person is in might affect that. But to me, the only guidance it might give somebody as far as a judge is they might be able to see where that person starts from. You know, when they're making decisions, where do they start from? But the reality is we're all supposed to come back to that center, unbiased middle ground line and follow the law.
Yeah, I agree. So you have to make these incredibly difficult decisions. You have to be in court all the time. You have to be the referee in jury trials. You have to be a politician. So that means if you're a politician, you have to go to the Rotary Club and this event and that event. First of all, I don't know where you find the time to do all this, but what forced you to sign up for this incredibly difficult job?
Oh, force is such a strong word.
What drove you?
Like somebody put my arm behind my back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What drove you to this?
I'm going to try to make this long story as short as possible. For those that know me, they know my father was a judge for over 30 years. So my whole entire life, that's what I grew up with. Originally, when I was a young child, he had similar thing. He had his own practice. He did public defender work. So I saw, this is what discouraged me. I saw how hard someone could work, like in your position. So how hard someone could work and still be discouraged, or still maybe not be able to provide everything for their family. And I was like, lawyers work really hard. There are some people that think lawyers have it easy. And some do. They have it easy. They're raking in the big money, you know, their names on billboards, and they get all these personal injury cases. Those people don't see the lawyers that are doing it every single day, you know, working really, really diligently to do whatever they can for their clients. When I was little, people used to bring to my dad that couldn't pay, they would bring food, or they're like chicken. You know, you grow up in a small community, they bring you the chicken to feed your family because they couldn't pay you. That's the kind of work he did. So I always thought that was, as a child, I was like, that's really, really, really hard. Then he ran for judge. So I remember what it was like having to be in a family that was a political family, where everybody's always looking at you all the time, which can be and all your actions.
Well, people laugh at your jokes more though, right?
Yeah. No, ask my husband, I'm not that funny. But you're just under the microscope constantly. So growing up, I was like, that is definitely, I mean, I don't know who would ever sign up for that. Why would anyone want to be a judge? Now, if you got picked to be a judge, that's great. But the whole political part that attaches to that, especially in a small community like ours, it's very, very, very political. So I went to college, got away from the small community, moved to New Orleans after college, went to grad school. I worked for lawyers during that time period, and everybody was always like, oh, you should go to law school. You should go to law school. Luckily, my dad never influenced any of that. Then aha moment, maybe I should probably go to law school. This is something, you know, your mind, that you realize that that's what you probably would be good at logically. I went to law school, but I didn't go to law school to become a judge. Went to law school, graduated from law school. Literally the first day I walked in a courtroom, what do you think the first question was?
Are you going to run for judge?
Yep. And all I could say was like, I didn't go to law school to become a judge. I had no thought. I was actually against it, meaning I want to be a lawyer. I want to work in my community. I want to make a difference, you know, but I want to be good at what I'm doing. I want to be a good lawyer. I don't want to be a judge. I don't want that responsibility. I don't want to run for office. So I was working with the public defender's office and doing my private practice. And you might be familiar with kind of your work with the public defender's office. Sometimes you can work so hard and put forth all this effort, and you show up for court and the other things that are happening didn't work as hard as you. And I'm not putting anything on a specific prosecutor or a specific clerk, but what happens is in the justice system, whether it's civil or criminal, I always explain it to people like this. It's a wheel, and every group is a spoke. The judge is a spoke, the clerk's office is a spoke, the bailiffs, the lawyers, all of that. prosecute, all of those people. So you can think you're making a difference. You can be that lawyer that's like busting your butt, doing the best you can, always being prepared, showing up. You got all your stuff together and you show up in court or, at a meeting with another lawyer and they're just not working as hard as you. So if somebody in that system decides they don't feel like it today, then it doesn't work. So in all of that time, I was, having my private practice, working with the public defender's office, I would get discouraged because I'm putting out the best I think I can. And then you show up and there's somebody else that just doesn't really care that much about their job. And I would just get so discouraged with the system. And still, you have everybody over here like, oh, when are you going to run for a judge? I hadn't even been practicing law long enough. You have to have 8 years in before you can even qualify. But I had a friend and I was very discouraged with my practice. I had a lot of really, really, really tough cases. Not that I thought I was going to win. That's one thing you become accustomed to when you do criminal defense work. It's not about winning and losing. It's about representing your client the best you can. So I had some cases that were really, really tough, and I was just getting discouraged with the system in general. And a friend of mine said, why don't you just run for judge? Because maybe if you were a judge, you could make people do things. You could make the lawyers more accountable. You could make the clerk actually care about what they're putting out. Because people believe that the judge actually has the power and authority to make things happen. So I thought about it for a little while, and then my dad decided he was retiring, and I talked to some people. I wouldn't say trusted advisors, but people that I felt would give me an honest answer. And without sounding, too cheesy, it's probably where I was supposed to be. I was fighting it for so long, but at some point you realize later in your life when you're more mature that maybe this is where I was supposed to be. Apparently it's what the community wanted. It fits, it works. Now that I'm there, I'm like, this is what I was supposed to be doing. Why did I resist it?
It seems like a natural fit. I mean, it helped that you had the same last name too, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have not seen an incumbent.
I would say this, what helped is when you have a good mentor, which would be, I saw what a judge was supposed to be in my father. So I knew, one, what it took, and I knew what I needed to be if I was going to be well respected in the community, well liked, and have people, people didn't want to see him leaving the bench.
No.
So if he was going to leave and I was saying, you should elect me,
right,
I need to be that plus better.
I learned from him.
Yeah.
So I'm the next one. He had 5 terms, right?
Oh God.
30 years, 6-year term.
1987. So he ran a long time ago, didn't get elected, and then he ran again. And it was my brother's senior year, so 1987.
As far as I've seen, most times the incumbent wins re-election. What's something that could force the community to turn on a judge?
I would just say,
what makes a bad judge is the question, really.
Not having respect for people. Sometimes I think when people aren't allowed to be on the bench anymore, when somebody actively runs against them and the community says that we don't want that person anymore, sometimes it's usually because something's happening. People don't feel respected. People feel that person's just not doing their job well anymore. They're not listening. They're not giving people the time. In my experience as a lawyer, sometimes I would say, sometimes a judge gets tired of doing their job. They get jaded. So at that point, they should retire. Hopefully I never get to that point. But there's some times where, at some point when you don't enjoy your job anymore, you need to stop doing it. So I think that's when usually you have somebody that runs against you. Is the community sees, or whether it's the legal community, the lawyers, they see that change where they had someone that originally started off and they were well liked, they were well respected, then it kind of, something started to happen where people lost that respect and faith.
And sometimes it's a lawyer that had a bad experience with a judge and says, I'm going to make him spend some money on this.
And, you know, there are situations where you have someone that's not the best that they can be, but no one's going to run against them because, as you know, no one's going to run against an incumbent. But then you finally have someone, like, not that that judge has specifically done anything, but you have someone out there that's like, you know what, I could do this and I could be better than what they are. And they put themselves out there. It's really hard, though, to put yourself out there against someone that's an incumbent.
So as hard as you work, I mean, I feel like you work all the time. You're in court, and then you take office hours where you're handling administrative things. You're signing, you're still meeting with people and signing things off. Where do you find free time, and what do you do with it? I guess you have weekends off. Well, yeah, I guess you have weekends off too.
Yeah, but so for judges, the good thing is, because we're like in charge of our schedule, so we control the calendar. So the best way to do it is to schedule your time appropriately. I mean, there's obviously stuff we can't control. There's some days where I look at my court calendar and I think, okay, well, today's going to be a good day. I'm going to get out at 1:30. No, never say that, because then you're there till 6 o'clock at night. But it's balancing your time, one, when you're actually scheduling it. Like, you know, when I started to make my court calendar, I already knew, like, I do better when I don't have court on Fridays, or I do better. So when I'm making my calendar, obviously our calendars go along with other judges, but when I'm making my calendar, I try to make it to where I can maximize my time the best way, but also give myself the appropriate downtime to know that that's going to be a crazy week. You don't need to do those 2 weeks in a row. Balance that out with a lighter court week or something. I wake up really early, naturally. So
What time?
5 o'clock.
Okay.
On the dot. Even if it's, you know, roll over and go back to bed, it's 5 o'clock. No matter what I try to do, I'm waking up at 5 o'clock. So usually I try to go get some exercise in the morning, even if I'm like, you know what, today's not the day I'm going to go run. Sit down and have a cup of coffee. Don't turn the phone on. Don't, you know, do any of that, because as soon as you turn your phone on to think like, oh, I'm going to read this article, a lot of times my husband will say, like, that's like 3 days old. I'm like, well, I didn't turn my phone on today, but this morning when I would have had time to maybe like turn on the news or read something, I'm like, you just got to sit and have a cup of coffee and literally not do anything for a half an hour. That way you can try to be calm, have a moment with just you and not bombarded with information. Because as a judge and as a lawyer, you are constantly bombarded with information,
Yes.
processing information, doing all that. So it's to balance that out and take the time to know I can't be good at my job unless I take care of myself. You know, before, when, you know, we were coming up as young children, it was always work. And that's what our parents taught us. You work hard, you know. My thought is you work hard so you can play hard, but you can't be good at what you do unless you take time to take care of yourself, which means whether it's to go exercise, or for people that don't like to exercise, to spend time with their family. A lot of people joke, because my husband and I like to travel a lot. And so they're always like, it seems like y'all are always on vacation. And I was like, well, that's because that's what I need to do. So when I'm doing my job, that's what I'm focused on. I'm you know, concentrating on that. But it's really just, I'm a scheduler.
Yeah.
So if I don't put it in my calendar, I'm going to not forget to do it, but taking care of myself physically. And as, I don't know, as a lawyer, you might realize this, but the stress on your body of practicing law, also the sedentariness of our jobs, we sit down a lot. So a lot of people, you know, they're like, oh, I'm exhausted. Today was such a hard day. And so that, what are they going to do? They're going to go home and sit on their couch and watch TV because they're tired. But if you go home and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go walk the dog, or I'm going to go run, I'm going to be stupid and go run 5 miles, you feel better, you sleep better. So in law school, I kind of learned that was my outlet. That was my way to take care of bringing down the stress level that you have with your environment or work, was getting a good run in. go and swim, doing something that physically engaged me. That's all I could do during that time period. I mean, you can still think about work while you're running, but hopefully you have some good music in, and every time that little thing creeps in, oh, I could have done this today. You turn up your music, or you look and you see something outside that'll distract you and get you back into that. This is my time. I'm not working. This is my time for myself, and doing that.
Yeah, I run marathons now, right? And so I just ran 2 marathons, and I've actually seen you on the route in Louisiana. I think you might run Louisiana at least a half marathon this year. Running forces me to unwind. Mm-hmm. And I even found I love listening to podcasts, hence the podcast, right? Even if I listen to a podcast while I'm running, something triggers my lawyer brain. I have to listen to music. Mm-hmm. I have to listen to good music so I could completely remove myself, because it's always there. It's constantly information overload. Somebody always wants to pick my brain. Somebody always wants to talk to me. I always have 4 phone calls I need to return. It is really a crazy way to make a living. All right, one final question. All right, if there was a movie made about you, who would play you and why?
Oh, wow.
And don't say someone, I'm not interesting. I'm boring.
Who would play me?
They asked me last week, and I said Ryan Gosling. I was like, everybody kind of snickered. I said, hey, come on. What do you think?
Got to be Meryl Streep, huh?
What's so unfortunate about that is I don't know what most actresses' names are. You can ask me about a song, and I can sing the words to the song, but I don't know the names of people.
Maybe you really are that boring. I don't know. I'm changing my opinion.
No, so people used to tell me this all the time. I'm not saying that actress would play my part, but you remember Jurassic Park?
Yes.
The doctor, the female doctor.
Good one.
People used to tell me I looked like her.
That's a really good one.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Because most of them are older actresses. Nobody's going to remember who those people are.
And then I asked you before we started filming. I said, there you go. What's her name?
People used to tell me I resembled.
That's good. I like that.
Ellie Sadler?
See?
I like it.
Her name. Ellie Sadler.
And then I asked you.
Look at the face. Hold on. Show him again. I try not to make that face in court, but there's times where you're looking at people and you have to be super, super patient. I get home at the end of the day and sometimes my husband's like, all you did was sit all day. And I'm like, do you know how hard it is to actually sit and not react, keep a calm demeanor, and control the environment in the room, like bring people down to a lower environment? I was like, that's much more tiring than reacting. I was like, so sometimes I worry that you're sitting there, and you trying to, it's really hard to, they say, fix your face because you're naturally, but sometimes you do give that look to lawyers. You're like,
yeah,
do you need to ask another question?
Right.
But
I mean, mental fatigue is way worse than physical fatigue. And like, after I sit in a deposition for 2 or 3 hours or sit in court, I'm like, I need to go take a shower. I need to go get in a cold plunge, something. But
do you find that in now that the marathons are your thing, I feel like you're getting at the beginning of your fitness, like that's the beginning of your run journey.
Yeah.
I guess you would say that's past for me, but that is preparing you also for your job.
I think
this like the build up and the stamina and what you're capable of now because of what you done in training and done marathons and the running and that mental focus. Without
question. I've talked a lot about it in some of the other podcasts, but running has made me such a better lawyer. Just from the thought that life is a marathon, right? Or a case could be a marathon. It's just one step in front of the other. But the mental stamina to stay engaged for a 4-hour run, right? Yeah. And just keep on pushing. It has made me such a better lawyer. It's made me more patient. It's made me more calm. It's given me endurance, because you have to have endurance, right? Even though it's physical endurance, you have to have mental endurance without question. I started running about 3 years ago, pretty seriously. I've run 5 or 6 marathons now. It has added tremendously to my career.
I found that because you're by yourself doing it. I mean, yes, you run with people and stuff, but when you're actually doing it, you're by yourself and you're talking to yourself a lot. You're talking yourself into stuff, out of stuff.
Oh.
It's that whole mental process that I found helped me in, whether it's my personal life, my work life, it helped me in that situation. So when people are like, why you run all the time? One, it relieves stress. And two, it actually made me better at other things.
Yeah, and what you
Because I'm not fast. I'm run slow.
I'm not a fast runner.
Or
either.
jog. I don't even know if you call it running. I think what I do is a jog.
Yeah, when you were talking earlier about just sitting down, like you recognizing that, like we sit down a lot, right? And even on the phone or whatever, we're sedentary. So you have to do something or else, you would gain weight, like that. Trust me, I was probably 210 pounds before I started running, which is at least 20 pounds more than I weigh now. So yeah, that was a huge game changer. Are you into tries? Cause I haven't, some guys are getting.
I haven't done it. So I'm going to tell you, this is what someone told me. So I did my first triathlons when I was in law school. I ran a marathon with a guy, not with him. I ran the same marathon he did. He was much faster than me, but I ran a marathon with a friend of mine from law school. And he had done Ironman, he'd done triathlons. And I was like, that's very interesting. My sister's done one. And I really need to get into swimming. I need to diversify my physical activity because running is not the best for your body if you could continue to do it.
Right.
And he was like, well, you've done the hardest part. The hardest part. I didn't just say I want to do triathlons. I just bit the big boy off. I was like, how do you think I could do in an Ironman? And he was like, you've actually done the hardest part. The hardest part of an Ironman is the marathon.
That's what they tell me.
It is. So if you know how to swim, or you can take a class and learn how to swim efficiently.
Right.
Everything else is, because that's the most daunting part. And then it's the end, and because you have already accomplished the mental part, which is the marathon. If you can do that, that's also the longest part. If you can do that, he's like, you can do the rest. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to try this.
Have you done a full Ironman?
Yes.
So you're an Ironman. Yeah. Where's the tattoo?
I don't know if I like anything long enough to put it on my body permanently. I struggled with that decision. I thought about it. Everybody has one.
Right.
And I thought about it, and it's just like a permanent thing. And I'm one of those, I'm like, what if I don't like it 2 years from now? What if I'm an old lady and I have this thing on my body?
Well, you can look back and say I was an Ironman.
But I also will always remember that I'm an Ironman.
Yeah.
So I used to think, not being disrespectful or condescending to people that get it, but I was trying to remember, what is the purpose of it? Am I getting it to remind myself that I did Ironman? I don't need that. I know I did it.
Right.
Am I getting it? Yeah, sometimes there's this oh, you did Ironman, I did,
That's amazing.
But I have a decal on my car. That's good enough.
Well, that's the true flex, right?
Car tattoo.
You did it, and so.
Well,
FYI, this is going to bug me, but Dr. Ellie Statling, it was the name of the character. It's
Laura
Dern.
Laura Dern.
Yes.
So put that in my memory bank.
So there you go.
If I ever got asked that question again.
Yeah, my son, who is a Jurassic Park and dinosaur enthusiast, would be very disappointed that I didn't know her name. Judge de Mahy, I really appreciate you being here today and spending your time off. I know your time is very valuable, especially on a Friday afternoon. You could be doing so many other things right now, but thank you. You've given us a peek behind the curtain and see all that there is to be a judge, and so I really appreciate you being here.
All right. You're welcome.
Thank you.